High school football season in Louisiana is in the books with 8 great state championship games just a couple of days ago. Great kind of running the gamut of some thrillers and then also some dominant performances. We saw a little bit of each. We're going to talk about some of those matchups that Sam and I saw in that Caesars Superdome over a 3-day span, particularly through the lens of who were some of the top performers we saw on that same dome turf where the Saints play. And before we get into that, we'll look at a couple of notable transfer portal homecomings for LSU and Tulane. He's Sam Spiegelman. I'm Jared Roser. This is Louisiana Universal's Recruit That Boot. And Sam, long time no see, man. How we doing back in Texas?
Doing great. There's nothing left in the tank. We're hanging on by a thread, but
well, look, man, it was the last games of the year. We didn't hold anything back.
We left it all on the field, and I feel great about that. I feel like that was one of my favorite experiences in the dome in a while. This year in particular has been just a wild roller coaster every year. So for it to end in that fashion, so many thrilling games, like you said, so many big time talents, some, familiar teams that we're so accustomed to seeing in the dome back, and then some newcomers making history. And that's, it's so stupid. So let me steal this from Archie Manning, but high school football is so great. And, the last couple of days in the dome just kind of exemplify why.
Does Archie Manning have that trademark that high school?
I think so.
I
think so.
Okay.
I think so. He's got it. He's got it locked down. You have to attribute it to Archie.
Anytime you say high school football is great, it's Archie Manning, and in quotes. So that is high school football is great. Quote Archie Manning. Quote Sam Spiegelman on the whiteboard behind him. Shout out to all of those state champions and all the runners up. Some fantastic teams, fantastic seasons. For folks that weren't there or not paying close enough attention, the state champions were Vermilion Catholic, South Plaquemine, Sterlington, Catholic New Iberia. I'm losing track of divisions trying to run through it too quickly. Cecilia, Archbishop Shaw, Central Baton Rouge, and Edna Carr. Runners up were Ouachita Christian, Haynesville, St. James, Dunham, Franklinton, Edie White, and on that last day, Ruston and Alexandria. Again, trying to go too quick. We'll talk more about those teams here in just a few minutes, but as I mentioned, we want to talk about a couple of really big transfer portal homecomings, guys that were, relatively recent high school prep stars here in Louisiana that we enjoyed covering quite a bit on those Friday nights. And they have since headed elsewhere for college out of state. And now, heading back home with the news that Tulane has added quarterback TJ Finley, the former Ponchatoula star and LSU signee. He's bounced around a little bit through the transfer portal and is going to come back home and wrap up his college career uptown with the Green Wave. And on the LSU side, a guy that the Tigers recruited out of Edna Carr in Destyn Hill has been out at Florida State. He's now coming home, to the home state, to Baton Rouge to play for the Tigers, where they continue to find talented Edna Carr folks to add to that roster. And I don't know which order you want to take these in. There's a little bit to unpack of each, but Sam, kind of, give me your thoughts on seeing those guys that again, we loved covering just a few years ago, heading on back home.
Yeah, well, you know what? Unsurprising for Tulane. Tulane is in desperate need of quarterback depth. Their quarterback room got raided with obviously the starter going to Duke and the two backups both hitting the portal. Now you get someone that TJ Finley, obviously it didn't work out at LSU, but at the lower levels at Texas State and at multiple at Western Kentucky, he's been able to kind of find his rhythm and kind of, be as productive as he was when he was at Ponchatoula. I don't think he has the ability to play at the SEC, but I think he has the ability in John Summerall's offense, which is littered with playmakers, fantastic offensive linemen, speed and athleticism on the perimeter, and some weapons out of the backfield that he doesn't have to be anything more than the conductor of this offense. And he's got plenty of experience and experience under his belt at this point that I think he's going to be a great addition to at least compete for snaps. Right now, I imagine that there's going to be some more quarterbacks behind him transferring uptown.
Yeah, they're definitely going to add some more. I mean, just obviously, even from a number standpoint, but I think he's coming into a likely competition standpoint. It's crazy to watch that Tulane room go from 3 guys who had some level of experience there, obviously, for the Green Wave, and then all heading elsewhere in Darian Mensah, Ty Thompson, and Kai Horton, unless something changes. Obviously, it's already been announced Darian heading up to Duke, but waiting to see what directions there may be there for Ty Thompson and Kai Horton. But TJ, obviously a big athlete with a big arm and a lot of experience, had a great year in 2023 at Texas State. He battled injury just as Destyn Hill did this year, and so we didn't see as much of him. But if he can get back healthy and play like he did a year ago, then he could be a really interesting addition for the Green Wave.
Yeah, like you said, it's definitely going to be a competition with whoever is going to be in that room with him. And under Coach Sumrall, the competitive fire is what you're going to be wanting at that quarterback position, because no matter what, it's going to be a new starter next year for the Green Wave, and the expectations are going to be really high. And I don't want to say it, but it might be Sumrall's last season, but they're expecting to be competing for a playoff spot. They almost did this year. On the second part of that, Hill return. What? I had to.
You love to frustrate the G5 fans. Dejon Smith, enjoy him for that year. And Rustin, you got him. Guys uptown, look, Summerall's not staying around for that
I
long.
don't know what to tell you. It's the truth.
Just let him enjoy the now, man, you know?
I'm just caveating it. Have fun, but just know, like you're dating this girl, but you know that it's not going to ever end up a little bit more serious than that. It's just going to be dating for a little bit, and that's the case with the transfer portal and with talented coaches like Coach Sumrall. But on Hill, listen, he was. We all know it took him a little bit to get to Florida State. So off the field stuff that he had to get squared away. But he was productive when healthy, and at very little time at Florida State in 23. And now, like you said, there's a ton of familiarity and resources and a comfort level back in Baton Rouge. LSU was a finalist along with Alabama when he picked Florida State. I think it was back in 2020.
I'm trying to remember what year. That sounds about right.
But I think Destyn waited until February to announce, if I remember. So it might have been 2021 because he was a 2021 class. But I can tell you, LSU in his recruitment often was the leader. And Cortez Hankton threw him his first offer when he was at Georgia. It was coming off of a rivals camp. He clocked a 4.48 40 as a sophomore. And it kind of spiraled out of there. He had such a productive junior and then senior season, playing alongside Aaron Anderson, who just had his breakout season in Baton Rouge after transferring in from Alabama. They're going to have young Teron Francis now coming up in a couple of months to learn under 2 former Carr standouts. Listen, Destyn Hill isn't going to have to be the number 1 wide receiver, but we know what he has, and that's juice. He has elite speed. He was testing in the 4.3s early on at Florida State. Aaron Anderson has speed. Barry and Brown from Kentucky has speed. These are guys that Cortez Hankton is going to have ready to go for Garrett Nussmeier. And I think this offense is going to be kicked up another gear next year.
I think similarly to what we said about TJ, if Fat can be healthy and show some of what we saw, in his case, more of just flashes of it in 23 as he was getting back out there on the field. I think this, in the context of they went and got Barry and Brown from Kentucky and add him to some pieces that are already there in place with that receiving core, I think it's a low risk, potentially really high reward addition if you can get the version of Destyn Hill that we've seen certainly at the high school level and in some spurts in Tallahassee last year.
He is, him and Aaron finished as a 5-star for Rivals at his time at Carr, and Destyn, man, we had the conversation just about how high he could go with his combination of speed, his body control, his catch radius. He's able to work not only on the perimeter, but really dangerous working on the inside. And what Joe Sloan and Cortez Hankton do is they find mismatches in this offense. They've done it with their array of different tight ends and pass catchers. And Destyn is someone I can see working on the other opposite slot of Aaron Anderson, being equally as dynamic in that role.
We're going to be talking more about Edna Carr by the end of this. We'll wrap up with that Division I select absolute domination of what was a really intriguing matchup going in that the Cougars quickly left no doubt about. But jumping into some of these Superdome matchups with the Division IV games and working our way up to those two big D1 games, you were making your way from the Mississippi-Alabama All-Star game to the Superdome, so you didn't get a chance to see much, if any, of that D4 select game that kicked us off. But the storyline for folks that weren't paying attention, obviously, was Jonathan D'Artes. They call him John. He and that 2025 senior class of Vermilion Catholic capping off their prolific and storybook high school career, winning more games than anyone ever had in program history. D'Artes, we talked about last week, the touchdown record and all those things. They finally get the state championship to kind of put the bow on the high school career. And of course, D'Artes does so by carrying the ball 47 times for over 250 yards, was also 8 of 11 passing for another 80 some odd yards. And so a kid that, I mean, is 5'8", 5'9", 160, 170, but has the ability to knife his way through tight running lanes in between the tackles, bounce outside, make some plays, get up the sideline, and then just continue to gain steam as a game goes on. I don't know what the opportunity is for him potentially at the next level, but he wraps up one hell of a high school career. And I'm hoping for a guy that is a well-rounded athlete and loves the game, obviously, that maybe there's something for him somewhere should he choose to, to find it. It's not going to be an LSU, but to find a home that fits for him. I don't know if you have any thoughts on D'Artes as he wraps up his high school career and just seeing a guy like that do what he did at the high school level, at least.
Yeah, this is for our listeners, this is a conversation I probably had every single day in the Superdome, and you and I have had on countless times over the past couple of weeks and honestly at months at this point. Is you joked about Dejon Smith, catching on in Ruston, and we're talking about him being an SEC level receiver potentially, certainly a Power 4 level receiver, and that next level down right now, there's it's difficult to see the impact it's having on high school recruiting when there's excellent players, record-setting players like Jonathan D'Artes that, most years you can connect to a Northwestern State or a Nichols or Southeastern, you name it. And nowadays, whether, it's happening in Louisiana, it's happening in Georgia and Texas and Florida, it's happening nationwide. It's this emphasis on the transfer portal and obviously high school players that can come in and make an impact sooner rather than later. And while that's all great and we love covering those players, there is an area where kids like Jonathan D'Artes are impacted in a negative way. And the more awareness I guess we can bring to that issue and highlight guys like D'Artes, the hope that maybe in a few years this trend can reverse itself. And because back in the day, not to start using that phrase as often as I'm using the state championship, Danny Lewis spiraled his recruitment by having a big December and even during the early signing period, didn't sign, had offers from LSU, Florida, and Alabama in February and signed with Bama. There's still, that just doesn't really exist nowadays, but maybe that doesn't have to be the case.
It's tough, man. The way that we've seen the high school game impacted by, going back to the extra COVID waiver year, and then you look at the transfer portal and NIL dynamics and how much everything has been kind of recycled and how much the time frames have been shifted up and the chances that colleges will take on guys that haven't panned out at other colleges, but they have seen another college want. They say, come on here for a second or third or fourth chance and be a guy that comes in here at least a little bit older and a little bit more physically developed to plug and play, because the coaches realize they may only have the guy for a year on their roster anyway. It's tough to wait on guys to develop and take a chance on some of those high school guys that may be a few years away, because you feel like you're taking that chance for them to ultimately pan out elsewhere. And it's become tough for the high school kids and their families, certainly. And I know it's beat us up a little bit seeing some guys really struggle to find college homes. It's been tough for the college coaches to figure out how to manage their rosters through a lot of this. And so it's become chaotic as can be with real amplified challenges for everyone involved, no doubt. But looking at the Division IV non-select game, which was, the second game of the weekend. You actually, I think, arrived more quickly from that Alabama-Mississippi game than you were anticipating and had a chance to see the bulk, if not the entirety of this one. And there were some fantastic players in this one that we'll see where some of those guys end up. But, I guess starting with the state champion South Plaquemine Hurricanes getting their first win in the Superdome since 2008, back when Coach Lyle Feet was a player on those back-to-back teams in 07 and 08. There were a couple of guys by the name of Williams that we were really impressed with. There was a gentleman by the name of Destyn McGee that we were watching wreak some havoc off the edge. Guys that, I think could realistically, again, be next-level players. It's just a matter of can they find the right spot to do so.
Yeah, Dino was one of the best players, and certainly one of those guys who I was considering for to get into that top 10 of performers inside the dome. I mean, this is a guy that was making plays off the edge as a pass catcher. He had some huge plays on critical downs down the stretch of that game. I think definitely the highlight of that game was obviously Lyle Feet and the emotions that he had bringing that trophy back to Plaquemines Parish. And not only did you have that community, but the entire Ruston and Louisiana Tech community rally behind that. I don't know if I've seen that outpour of support for a coach in some time. I mean, we're about to talk about Hank Tierney in a little bit, but that's besides the point. Lyle is a young coach that is now is a state championship winner. On the recruiting side, that's definitely tough, but overall, just what a moment for the Hurricanes and getting back into the winning column in a fantastic way, but with their seniors really leading the charge.
So we mentioned Dino McGee, the two Williamses that I mentioned, Trevante Williams, the big versatile athlete who's a defensive wrecking ball more in the middle of that defense for the Hurricanes, plays all over on offense as well, plays some offensive line. We saw him more as a big-bodied running back who had a chance to rack up some yardage in the state championship game, which freed up the smaller Williams, Jaheim Williams, they call him Chubb, who is more of a secondary player or running back or out on the perimeter, where he was able to score all three of the team's touchdowns on offense and had a big interception leaping in the middle of the field late to help kind of seal that thing away. Also, shout out to Alex Phillips, a hard-hitting linebacker for that team, another senior leader. It is a team that was not short on talent, particularly when you look at a roster that, 28 to 30 players. The amount of guys that were really impressive all season long and once again on the dome turf is really strong for that program.
I couldn't agree more.
On the Haynesville side, Kazavion Woods, another big game with several tackles in the middle of that Haynesville defense. Isaiah Washington is a guy in that junior class for Haynesville that we really like quite a bit. He's an athlete at quarterback for them, but we saw some of his work at safety where he had 7 tackles in the game, one of the team leaders in tackles, almost made a leaping interception down the middle of the field in his own right. He's a guy that I think sprouting up to 6'1", 170-ish. I think he has a chance maybe next year's class to find a spot for himself as a third-year starter for the Golden Tornado. And, that list kind of goes on. I liked Zacharias Fielding, the speedy senior corner for the Golden Tornado. But tell me a little bit about your takeaways of watching Isaiah Washington for, I think, the second time now. We saw him last December as well in the Superdome, but now as a more established leader on that team, what you saw from him as some of his potential at the next level.
Yeah, you love an athlete. I mean, we've seen it obviously in the form of like Josh Brantley, where you see this guy who has size, speed, some obviously vision in the open field, some playmaking ability. The only holdup I have is when you're a Golden Tornado in Haynesville. We love to see you try out these different positions. I would love from a college perspective, from a recruiting standpoint, can we see him work out at more snaps and maybe at safety where you can see that playmaking on display and see if that offensive IQ also shows up with some defensive prowess, or if he's going to be an offensive playmaker potentially, like how does he catch the football? We know that he's dynamic in space and handling the football, but I'd love to see, how, playing receiver and being able to absorb hits through contact and learn the intricacies of route running and getting in and out of your breaks is obviously a big part of that game. So I'd love to see a little bit more from that from the because he's so impactful for Haynesville, but at one position. What I can tell you is we finally can tell Margaret Orr that we know what happens when a Golden Tornado meets a Hurricane.
This is Margaret Orr's first shout out on the Louisiana vs. All Y'all channel, and I think it maybe was overdue. So I'm glad we got it in there. A New Orleans legend.
No arguments for me.
In the Division III non-select game, Sterlington ends up getting the best of St. James, a rematch of a semifinal from last year. The Panthers, who went into this year not expected to have this be one of the years where they were competing for a state championship, not one of their teams with as high of an expectation as some in recent years. They end up 2-3 to start the season against a tough schedule, a lot of adversity. Coach Lee Doty said he doesn't know that anyone was really believing in them outside of their room at that point. And I think that is fair. That's not one of those Kirby Smart, no one believed in us, we're underdogs type situations. That was closer to accurate than just being coach speak. And instead, the Panthers were dominant through most of the playoff run, and Lee Doty called it this year his and his staff's Mona Lisa in terms of a masterpiece, and the final brushstrokes winning a physical game against top-seeded and talented St. James. For Sterlington, you have to shout out the offensive line, blocking the way for 5 different running backs with 9 carries each, 39 yards each or better, led by Hagen Herring, the senior, with 15 carries for 121 yards and 2 touchdowns. David Hickman with a couple of touchdowns as well. TJ Birch had a touchdown. And when you're watching Sterlington free up space for those guys and be able to pull out a win against a St. James team we really like pretty much every year, including this year, and a lot of folks expected to go in there and win that game. What stood out to you about watching the Panthers cap off their first title run since 2021?
Yeah, I think you're sniffing in the right direction. I think that offensive line was fantastic. I think they're the MVPs. I wish we could give an offensive line group MVP for certain games. I think the Union Parish offensive line would have been in that consideration, or the Manny offensive line years past. Shout out to Manny Maid. But the Sterlington offensive line, they were big and they were moving what was a really talented St. James defensive front that had some size, that had some speed, that has some defensive backs that are not afraid to get their knees dirty and make tackles. And that offensive line dominated. They set the tone for the most part in that game. Like you mentioned, multiple guys, everyone, there was different running backs. I kept having a right look, make sure I was looking at the right running backs. Wasn't very familiar with Sterlington, and so many different backs were effective because that offensive line was getting so much movement off the ball. And you know what, if you're going to make a state championship run, it starts with the offensive and defensive lines if you're going to have a chance. And that's what Sterlington had and leaned on. And credit to Lee Doty. As long as you got those big guys up front, I like your chances.
A couple of other, I'm not going to say unsung, but maybe undersung heroes for Sterlington. Aiden Parker, the big leg specialist, who was fantastic, had a 49-yard punt there late down to the 8-yard line that put a long field in front of St. James. He averaged 55.2 yards on his 5 kickoffs, 3 touchbacks, only allowed 1 return for 8 yards in the kicking game, and so kind of neutralized some of the explosiveness of the Wildcats in that regard. Also, Cam Bagwell, a sophomore edge rusher for the Panthers, disruptive on some big downs, and Tamarion Birch with some big tackles, as well as the late interception. On the St. James side, the only defensive player to win outstanding players over the course of the weekend, and I think we're going to get into that conversation a little bit more when we get back to Division I as well. But Nolan Zenon ended up with 23 tackles on the game, which is insane and speaks to both the type of offense they were going against as well as what he was doing to help kind of contain a lot of things in the middle. On, I guess, one more shout out on that defensive side as well. You talk about the DBs for St. James tackling. Gary White had some big tackles out there on the perimeter, 3rd and 4th down tackles that helped get the ball back to the offense, where Kanai King Young, I thought, was great with his 123 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. Ja'Kaius Villanueva, they went too often early on to kind of get some things into a rhythm with a young quarterback at the helm, and Ja'Kaius ended up with 5 catches for 42 yards, 2 rushes for 11 yards and a touchdown. And for his size in particular was really tough. There were moments where the Sterlington defense, it was taking a couple of guys to try and bring down Ja'Kaius because he was fighting for those extra yards in the red zone. And then wanted to ask you more specifically about Jawan Jackson, that freshman quarterback thrown into the fire right off the bat going into his high school career, and helps lead his team to a state championship game. finishes 12 for 20 in the Superdome for 179 yards and the touchdown. Had some plays where he was able to extend some things, show some poise, and get the ball downfield. Obviously, a young guy and some lessons to be learned from this experience as well. But looking at the brightness of this guy's future, what stood out for you about a guy that, I mean, our buddy Chris Singleton was saying, folks in the area are saying, does he look like a young Lowell Narcisse?
I was about to get into that. Now,
Is
first of all, this
sky high praise for that area of the state, obviously.
yes, I mean that you're talking about a living legend who's now coaching over at AC, who was the freshman that everyone was buzzing around the state. I think first off, credit to Juwan for helping lead St. James all the way to the Dome. That's unprecedented stuff for young quarterbacks, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that with Elijah Haven and Dunham as a sophomore. But Juwan to do it as a freshman, even more impressive. And for him, he stepped up a couple of times and made some big throws in this. He's got the arm strength to put it downfield, and I thought honestly, moving outside the pocket was very calm and controlled and accurate throwing on the run. And we know he's not really a threat to take off and run, but he is a big quarterback. I think that's where the comparisons to Junior come in. He can lower his shoulder and pick up some key yardage on short down and distances. Listen, I don't know if this young kid is going to turn into what Lowell Narcisse was doing at his heyday in St. James, but in terms of talking about high school quarterbacks that you like to win games, Juwan has stepped up and done that multiple times as a freshman. And it gives me a ton of confidence that if he'll take another step forward, if he can continue to take another step as a passer, we already see the grit and the athleticism that he's going to be just fine, orchestrating this offense and being able to make plays through the air and also with his legs.
Folks love to make comparisons and just try to find those closest comparisons to make sense of, organize who they can explain someone that looked like that we've seen before. But at the end of the day, let Juwan Jackson go be the best Juwan Jackson he can be over the next few years. And the really exciting part for him and for that Wildcats team is that most of those players that I just rattled off will be back again next year. And so when they talk about wanting to go chase another Superdome opportunity and finish the job next year, most of that team will be back and be another year older and have a chance to be, another step or two better versions of themselves when it comes time to play some big time football in December. That touchdown pass too from Juwan to another freshman in Cam Mitchell. And so a lot to be really excited about for the future for Coach Davis and company down there in beautiful downtown Vacherie. You mentioned Elijah Haven, who we're going to talk about in a second with this Division III select game, but continuing on the pattern of kind of hitting on the state championship winners first, and then talking about some of the standouts from the runners up. Luke Landry, the other quarterback, kind of going into this game, Elijah Haven had all the spotlight on him, and Luke Landry, the senior from Catholic New Iberia, was the other quarterback. Luke has been fantastic all year and was once again in the Superdome, being able to get the ball out to his playmakers, buy some time with his own legs, finished 19 for 35 for 226 and 2 touchdowns. Just made that Panthers offense go in really impressive fashion. It's also going to be part of a running theme that began with Jonathan Dartez, where we talk about some somewhat undersized Lafayette area quarterbacks that have a certain it factor to be winners on the high school football field for sure. What were your takeaways from watching Luke Landry lead that Panthers offense, lead the Panthers team to its first state championship since 2017?
Yeah, Luke was excellent. He's just a gamer. I think, he spoke about it after the game that, he was motivated. He knew, who was playing on the other side. And every time we've seen Catholic of New Iberia in the Dome, that team has been ready to go over the past 5, 6, 7 years and making their first return in a couple of years. But I was really impressed by him. It seemed like Catholic New Iberia just could not be stopped for multiple parts of that game. There's differing opinions on whether momentum exists or doesn't exist in football. But if you are a believer in the momentum prophecy, Luke was a huge reason why Catholic New Iberia was able to swing momentum. Dunham was off to a 2-touchdown lead at one point, if you would have checked in at the end of the fourth quarter, this felt like Catholic New Iberia was dominating, and that's a big part because he was creative. He was kind of fearless, and he was up to the challenge, which we do love to see from high school quarterbacks.
Momentum is very real, especially at the high school level when you're talking about how do high school age student athletes react to situations. And so things can very quickly snowball over the course of a 4-quarter contest when you're talking about not just 17-year-olds, but 16-year-olds and 15-year-olds. And we just talked about Jawan Jackson, who, I mean, is he 15 yet? We got some young guys in big roles where some things are going to come and go in waves. On the defensive side of the game for Catholic New Iberia, shout out to a couple of linebackers who are all over the place in Bennett Woodring and JD Hidalgo, 18 tackles and 14 tackles respectively, a tackle for loss each, a forced fumble each, and then a young guy, Karan Eugene, good size at that safety spot for the Catholic New Iberia sophomore safety. He was all over the place too, and he was playing with some edge to him for a lot of that game for his 11 tackles and letting the Dunham Tigers hear about it, and then snatches the interception at the goal line there to save it. He's someone that I think has the look of an athlete that we might be needing to watch here for the next couple of years.
Usually when your last name is Eugene, you end up being a pretty decent football player. I haven't fact checked this, but I believe his dad played in the NFL, so there is some pedigree to him. And you mentioned it. He was all over the field, playing multiple positions in the secondary. He broke down what he had seen, just great instincts on that play. It's a really athletic play. As you know, I've watched it a couple of times since, and Elijah is moving and he's moving almost in slow motion. It's almost like as Elijah drops back to throw, he's out of his breaks, knowing exactly. I think he talked about his spatial vision on that play, which was easy to kind of see once he spoke about it. And it's an exceptional play. Even if he would have knocked it down, it would have been a great play. Obviously, it would have been a game saver. But to intercept it was a game-winning play. And you're exactly right. I think we're going to be talking about him. Of course, this is the same school that Trey Amos came from, so they're used to D1 prospects. So he's 2027. So we'll see what happens this spring.
For the Dunham Tigers, the guy that we've mentioned, and also for folks that kind of bounce around and look at different content on the channel, that interception by Karan is one of the 4 Podna's Play of the Week candidates this week. And so folks that want to go check out that and vote for Karan and the Catholic New Iberia game-saving interception there late, by all means, go and check that out. On the Dunham side, I mean, shout out to a couple of those receivers, Trevor Heyman and Jarvis Washington Jr., 11 catches and 10 catches. Jarvis for 151 and a touchdown. Looked like he might have had a second one there right before halftime. Trevor Heyman, 122 yards and a touchdown. And the guy, you want to talk about the receivers before we get it to the...
He almost had a touchdown that I think should have counted too. I think the officiating, this is the worst officiating of the weekend.
And Neil Weiner kind of walked the line there with his comments afterward of feeling like everyone in the Dome saw that the Jarvis Washington catch on the Hail Mary before halftime was very much in, and that not much else was communicated smoothly. But at the end of the day, that was one play in a long game, and they had other opportunities, and he doesn't want to blame it on the officiating. But it was an interesting game of ebbs and flows, both between the teams on the sidelines and that team in the stripes between them. But Elijah Haven, I mentioned, was as a guy that went into this weekend with as much spotlight as maybe any other player in a state championship game. And he did what we had seen him do in a lot of other situations where there were times where it wasn't always pretty for Dunham, but he was finding ways to make some things happen, get some things done. And then when they were there, he was making big time plays in a lot of moments. Elijah Haven, the sophomore quarterback, finished with 32 carries for 153 yards and 2 touchdowns, 25 for 37 through the air for 300 yards and 2 touchdowns. And just that late interception in terms of a mistake there that cost them, obviously, but they're not in that situation. They're not in that game to begin with without Elijah Haven, who, for a young guy who, again, is not to the Christmas break of his sophomore year of high school yet, showed why a lot of colleges around the country are really excited about him.
Yeah, I think his numbers were somewhere along the lines of 450 yards and 4 touchdowns. I mean, 32 carries as the workhorse running back for the Dunham Tigers, the leader in passing. And he stepped up to make a couple of big throws on the move, off platform, on the money for touchdowns. He delivered a dime on that Hail Mary, whether it was in or out. He gave his receiver a chance. And we think that Jarvis, who played excellent in this game as well, also. But I think that Elijah delivered there. He threw the exact same route to the other receiver, and they also called it out, even though he was, by my count, in. Elijah made the same throw. It's an in-breaking slant over in-breaking post in the red zone that he just is spot on throwing over the middle. 32 carries. Watching back the carries, and I remember thinking it over the game, and the amount of hits he's taking, the amount of times at 6'4", 190 pounds, he's bouncing off of tacklers, putting his arm out to stiff arm them, powering forward. Completed the first 9 of his 10 passes. I think he completed north of 70% on the game. I think in the entirety made one mistake in the entire game, in my opinion, towards the back end, just trying to make a play for his team. The biggest thing for me was Elijah Haven put forward some of the best tape as a freshman last year at the Dunham School, and he took a massive leap forward this past year. I know it didn't end the way that he or Dunham or Neil Weiner wanted, or the crowd rooting for Dunham, but he put them in a position to win that game so many times. I thought he was the best player on the field from start to finish. I thought he was one of the best overall performers, and if that game would have ended up in a different light, if one of those 2 touchdowns would have counted, or if he would have snuck it in on a 3rd or 4th down instead, we're talking about the MVP potentially of the entire weekend for the spectacular big game performance. I think we said it after the AC game. To me, he can take over the game at any point, which is just unheard of for a sophomore. And he's only getting better. He is such a hard worker with an immense skill set. His upside is higher than anybody else's. And that's why to see him take these steps and continue to step up and put his team in a spot to win in these big games carries so much weight.
When we talk about the momentum and how quickly some things can get away from a high school kid and watching young guys grow up, and we've emphasized a bunch now, Elijah as a sophomore, just as we did with Jawan Jackson as a freshman, regardless of game situation, pressure coming after him, who's winning the line of scrimmage, Elijah is just the same kid pretty much every single play. He's out there playing with poise. We watched him have to scrap out a battle against Ascension Catholic. I watched him have to come back from that 30-13 fourth quarter deficit in the quarters against Lafayette Christian. And there they were in the fourth quarter, again, down 17. And a lot of teams, particularly with a young guy at the helm, would have been out of that thing. But with him there, they weren't. There was a lot of confidence. They rallied right back on their not dead, can't quit mantra. And the confidence that he has on that field at any given moment emanates to the rest of the team and vice versa, where they just kind of keep on rolling. And that's really impressive to see at his age, to always have that level of confidence and focus on what play is next ahead and not, what has happened for the past drive or the past couple quarters or whatnot. Jumping up to Division II non-select, which was a bonkers game to cap Friday. I mean, I think I called the third quarter about the most chaotic fever dream of a scoreless quarter you could ask for. I don't know how there was so much action in a quarter without touchdowns, and there were plenty of touchdowns in the other 3 quarters, but the end of it, Cecilia finds a way to make plays on all 3 phases and come back and beat Franklinton late, win the Bulldogs' first state championship since 1995. And again, we're going to talk about guys from both these teams, and there's several to talk about for that Cecilia team. But let's start with Duprez, Diesel Solari, the explosive, versatile athlete that plays quarterback for the Bulldogs, just tough as nails, explosive when he puts his foot in the turf, ends up with 18 carries for 148 yards and 2 touchdowns, 8 for 18, passing for 69 yards, and the long touchdown through a deflection to his senior running mate, Ellis Stewart, to send the green and gold side of that stadium into absolute hysterics. Tell me about what it's like watching Diesel. I've had a chance to see an awful lot of him these last couple of years in person. You've had a chance, at least the last 2 Superdome experiences. Describe the folks that weren't there watching Diesel Solari and just everything that he brings to that team.
I had 2 different people within different points of that game come up to me and say, where is this? Why doesn't this guy have offers, or why isn't he committed or signed with a school? And not to keep beating the same dead drum, but that's a great question. Diesel stepped up. I mean, this kid can barely throw the football, and you see, it's like watching a peewee football quarterback just try to launch it as hard as he can, like a Nerf ball. But he gets it to his receivers. He
slings that thing around, man. Coach Lalonde and company, those guys, Coach Harrison last year, who's now at Destyn, but they have made Diesel into a really special quarterback for them and what they do.
Certainly not a natural quarterback by any means, but for sure, no. Watching him play, he's got this stop-start quickness, and he accelerates in such a hurry. He's such a vivacious runner. I mean, he's like a little missile. To me, I'm like, where is Nichols with him? The Diesel to go into Nichols is a perfect match. Just that immediacy and twitch that he runs with. I was super impressed. Like I was, like I said, every time he threw the ball, I got a little bit nervous, but he was spot on for his receivers, and they are all talented. I love the little, the fact that they have 3 really great athletes that all share different roles on this offense. That kind of keeps you guessing. And that spontaneity of that offense is really what kind of drives it. And Diesel is a huge part of it. He can do a little bit of everything. He's such a little spark plug. Was so ecstatic for them to end up on the winning side of this.
That's kind of the 3 face of the franchise seniors in Diesel and Brent Gordon and Ellis Stewart, who are all very interchangeable in a lot of ways. Diesel, obviously, typically the spark plug, straw that stirs the drink type guy for that team. And I agree with you. What I've been telling people repeatedly with him is you cannot possibly tell me that he can't find a role in some packages for a Southland offense. I've seen him route run. I've seen him catch the ball. We obviously see him running the ball if you want to move him to a running back spot, but he's a difference maker for someone in some capacity. And I think that is the basement of it, and that he could potentially do more, whether in terms of the level that he goes to or the bigger role in the right offense. But I hope so much that whatever that path is for him to find a spot in college and get that opportunity and build on it, that someone gives him that chance, because he's someone that can make a difference for a program, as we've seen be the case for a Cecilia program the last few years that hadn't won a state championship since 1995. The other guys, all great. Ellis Stewart working through essentially his flu game situation for 4 catches and 41 yards and that game-winning go-ahead touchdown. We talk about Brent Gordon, the fantastic defensive back who's going to be heading to Lafayette at the next level. He had 8 tackles, a tackle monster for those guys in the secondary, a couple of catches for him. Braylon Jones led the team with 13 tackles, including a sack. And the sophomores, I've got to shout out my guy, Frankie Frank Jr., who had the absolute thievery of a fumble there late to set up that touchdown, a guy that was a talented cover corner for them as a youngster, and they wanted to see get bigger and more physical, and has really improved quite a bit as a tackler this year and stepped up huge on defense in that moment late. And then the guy that everyone's going to be talking about for the next couple of years, one of the top prospects in the state for the 2027 class, Braylon Kale, one of the bigger skill guys on the field in that game, and then immediately flashes the speed with the kickoff return to even the game at 7-7 after Franklinton just had that great opening drive. Braylon ends up with 9 carries for 52 yards and a touchdown, had 3 catches for 36 yards, mentioned the kick return numbers, had the 6 tackles for the team and also forced a fumble. And so talking about versatile playmaking, Mr. Calais was fantastic. And I know you agree with me in that he's someone that folks need to be watching from a recruiting standpoint for 2027 as well.
Yeah, I loved seeing Braylon in the spring make a huge catch. It might have been Battle Miami, or can't remember where I was. But he put himself on the radar back then. And seeing him in person, I mean, you and I talk all the time. I love when certain skill position players or or even big men get to see snaps on both sides of the ball, and you get to see them move in different ways. To see him work out of the backfield, to see him be a receiver out of the backfield where I already know he's a capable receiver, to see him as this off-ball linebacker jarring the ball loose and flying around and making plays behind the line of scrimmage, and obviously showing that same speed that he can catch passes with, going sideline to sideline. And of course, like you mentioned, the kickoff on their opening possession. He's a Swiss Army knife. I was so impressed with Braylon and the first live game evaluation. He's only a 2027. He's already a top 100 athlete in the country out of beautiful Cecilia. I'm so excited to kind of figure out what position he ends up taking to. Obviously, he is proficient at receiver and really talented with excellent size, but he is really talented on the defensive side of the ball. No matter what, I would love to see him continue to keep making plays on special teams. But what a difference maker. I think he has the ability to just kind of be a game breaker on either side of the ball at this point, which I'm super excited about his next couple of years.
Love it. He's a guy that, we're going to talk so much about these 2027 quarterbacks in years to come. We, talk already so much about Ahmad Hudson. Jaden Miles is a guy at Catholic we're going to be talking more and more about. And Braylon Calais is right there in the thick of that among the top power forward type prospects that we'll be watching around Louisiana. For Franklinton, we saw the junior quarterback, Jacob Crane, 21 for 29 for 224 yards. 10 of those receptions going to McLean for 125 yards. And then the outstanding player for those guys, the fantastic senior running back, Cy Austin, 147 yards and 3 touchdowns on 30 carries. Had a couple of catches for 19 yards, caught a 2-point conversion, was someone that Coach Salt went to bat for after the game, saying, if he's not a college football player, then Salt must be Vince Lombardi, because the way that he's been producing for the Demons to this point is in his mind something that college coaches are missing the boat on, and that extends past just the genius of Coach Salt, that there's something there with Cy Austin. What were your impressions of Cy, who, again, coaches are going to go to bat for their kids, and I think rightfully so, but Cy's a guy that can play on Saturdays somewhere.
It's the same story. Obviously, Franklinton was not a team that anyone pegged to make it to the Superdome. So you're talking about a kid who had a breakout senior season. Coach Salt runs an offense predicated on the spread and obviously a little bit of option play for the quarterback. So the quarterback has to be making decisions on every single play. And Cy did a great job all season long. Our good friend Julie had asked, why isn't he going anywhere? It's the same question. I think, for Coach Salt, it's his job to put on for Cy and try to, command the attention of coaches. But at the same time, this is the same battle that we're all fighting, trying to get players like Cy. And we're talking about almost every single game here. There's a player to a senior that is in this position. We need the NCAA to wake up, man.
In the Division II select game, we're going to focus on some of these guys for Shaw, but, mention Edie White's quarterback, junior quarterback, Grant Barbera, the outstanding player for those guys, 12 for 17 for 133 yards. And just leading off with them, because you talk about some of the decision-making necessary for Jacob Crane up there at Franklinton. Same sort of deal with Grant down there at Edie White. Coach Lassane talked about it after, just his poise and decision-making, leading that offense, getting the ball to the right guys, whether it's him pulling it or handing off in different directions, was huge for that Cardinals team that started off the game so well. Charlie Dietrich, the junior linebacker, big-bodied linebacker there with 8 tackles for the Cardinals, trying to slow down that Shaw Eagles rushing attack, and did so for a huge chunk of that game. Jasper Parker, the Michigan signee at running back, was slow starting. He was battling through a banged up right ankle that he had been in treatment for, just trying to get right enough for that game. And while you were waiting on things to get going on the ground for Jasper and his senior quarterback, Mason Wilson, Jacob Washington busts out the Jacob Washington legacy game in the Superdome before he heads up to Ann Arbor with Jasper. He was open early and often, ends up with 8 catches for 105 yards, 2 touchdowns, had the bobbled one that he's able to secure before it hits the turf right before halftime. That was such a huge turning point for those guys. And then once Jasper gets going for 174 yards and a touchdown, also has another big run that sets up a Jacob touchdown late that kind of helped put the game away, stretched it out to a 2-score lead there for the Eagles. And so our guy, Hank Tierney, helps Archbishop Shaw win its first state championship since 1987. A lot of folks were there to support him. Coach O was there, Mickey Joseph, and just a whole crew of faces of Louisiana high school football, who's who through so many years, so many decades, there to watch Hank Tierney and the Eagles bring one back to the West Bank. And that senior trio I mentioned really led the way, and particularly the Michigan-bound duo of Jasper Parker and Jacob Washington. And you're just sitting back smiling, excited to talk about it. So go on ahead.
I can't believe you're not even going to mention those talented sophomores that sat next to.
Well, we're going to get there. We're going to get there. The fact that Hank brought the sophomores to talk to us was one of the wins of the day, to see Rontre Carter and Tristan Evans out there.
Don't be doing my guy Hank like that. So dirty, Jared.
Me?
Let's talk about Jacob Washington's breakout moment. Obviously, he was waiting for my presence to do this because I have been his biggest supporter. I feel like he has been so good in camp settings. This was his breakout game. It just clicks at a certain point for everyone, and it clicked in a big way for Jacob, the future Wolverine. Really outstanding route running, making plays after the catch, high pointing the football, holding on through contact. His separation downfield is extraordinary. That's kind of where his game is predicated on. He is a big, speedy receiver. And yeah, he might have bobbled it, but he held on, and then really came away with a really impressive grab that you alluded to on the game icing touchdown, catching the ball, separating at the last second, and catching a really great pass from Mason Williams, who also fits that underrated senior profile. Love seeing Jacob's breakout game. I think that under Ron Bellamy, some more coaching, I think the more opportunities are just going to open up Jacob down the road. Get him in a weight room, continue to sharpen up different areas of his game. But you see the potential that he is a big playmaking receiver that can work on the perimeter and provide that big play spark. And then our guy, Jasper Parker, another guy heading to Ann Arbor. Obviously, like you mentioned, battling through the injuries, and he's a running back that thrives off of big cuts. You saw him in the second half, though. He started playing, I guess, no tape, no problem for Jasper. He cut back on that 62-yard touchdown run. That broke the game for Shaw Open. That was a turning point for them, but he runs so hard. He's so difficult to tackle in space, even with his an injury lagging him. Man, he runs so hard through arm tackles. If you slow down some of the replays, it's fun to watch Jasper just break loose. He's like a thoroughbred, and he's going to go to be a part of a Michigan backfield that is going to have a big offensive line and a downhill running game. And I couldn't think of a better fit. I think that, listeners of this show that might be LSU fans, they might be a little bit jealous that Jasper Parker is going to Michigan, because that is the cutthroat running style that we've seen a lot of great LSU running backs have. It's the kind of downhill running style that Nick Saban has had implemented at Alabama, and he's going to go to Ann Arbor, be a part of a really, really talented backfield and potential offensive game plan up there.
The good news for those LSU fans is they do get JT Lindsey and Harlem Berry, so that's a nice crop of running backs coming in that 2025 class. But Jasper Parker is obviously someone we've talked about a ton on this show, and both are extremely high on what he was doing on Friday nights and what he has ahead for him on Saturdays and potentially beyond. You wanted to send those guys off to Michigan already and say, to hell with Jacob and Jasper. I want to talk about these sophomores, so I'll let you talk about them. Tristan Evans and Rontre Carter, each with 9 tackles to tie for the team lead. Rontre is a guy that when folks are asking who were kind of the next young players coming out of the city that are going to be high-level prospects, Rontre is a ball hawk when he has the opportunity to be so, and is very comfortable navigating traffic and being physical in the box. And we've seen that since he was in 8th grade as an all-district 8th grader for a Hank Tierney team. And now will be, Hank told us kind of the spoiler alert, he expects him to be a junior captain next year, which is not something Hank is used to either. Tristan Evans, a guy I saw on the 7-on-7 circuit last year with some bootleggers tryouts, but another guy that is an awful lot of intrigue to him as a young football player and should be a key playmaker for that Eagles defense next year. But go ahead. The stage is yours for that 2027 Eagles duo.
Yeah, I think Rontre is going to end up being the top nickel defensive back in the 2027 class. I think watching him play he's playing a little bit out of position, playing linebacker for Shaw, but the kid flies around like you mentioned. He's the ball hawk as a true safety. His hips are fantastic, and running with bigger pass catchers and receivers, he does just fine. Hank Tierney has put him to work. I imagine he'll get to play a little bit more of a freelance safety role next year, much like Jacoby Matthews used to play. But I think ultimately, I know that Ole Miss has already offered. I believe Houston has already offered.
I think so.
I think ultimately, and obviously we're several years away and so much can change before then. He's a perfect match for that nickel, being physical against the run and being so quick in the hips and in coverage and instinctive to work out of the nickel.
Going to those D1 games, D1 non-select, another one where we're going to spend the bulk of our time talking about the team that came out on top because it was a pretty lopsided affair. Just like we all anticipated, Central Baton Rouge rolling Ruston out of the Superdome with a 42-0 win, holds the Bearcats, the reigning champs, to 90 yards in the game. The bright spot, one of limited bright spots in a long afternoon for Ruston, was Jaden Anding stepping in to that much more spotlighted of a role. His big brother battling, an injury or health concern, or however we want to frame it, at the end of this high school football season, which quite frankly, sucked to see Aiden not be able to be out there with his guys. I know it hurts for him, but as Coach Ball mentioned, there's a lot ahead for that young man in Baton Rouge and again, potentially beyond that. And so doing the right thing and trying to make sure that he doesn't risk anything unnecessarily for a high school game, even if it was a state championship. Little brother, though, in that 27 class, Jaden Anding ends up the outstanding player for the Bearcats with 11 tackles, including 2.5 for loss. But let's talk about that Wildcats team that just came out there, was supposed to allegedly have the brakes beaten off of them, according to a certain high school coach elsewhere in the state, and instead came out and was the team beating the brakes off of its opponent. You can start with them wherever you want, because there's a lot to unpack about a fantastic performance by the Central Wildcats. David Simino and company, excellent to finish the game in week 15, finish the season in week 15.
Definite. Start with a shout out to Coach Simino and as he said in his press conference to Coach Camp, the defensive coordinator. Let's start with DK Mays having, again, just like Jacob Washington, maybe his best game of the season. A fumble recovery, scoop and score for a touchdown. He had a tackle for a loss. Rip had his jersey ripped, changed numbers. Then he had a batted pass at the line of scrimmage and another couple of tackles behind the line of scrimmage. DK Mays, part of a defensive front that slowed this vaunted Ruston rushing attack to under 100 yards. Absolutely stellar performance by 6'4", 240-pound DK Mays heading to Houston next year. Willie Fritz is bringing in several of Louisiana's best defensive front seven players, with DK and Rashad Sterling right at the top. And DK Mays had that's the game that we were kind of hoping to see from DK early on. We saw them against De La Salle, and I joked with him in the post game that, maybe the injury kind of slowed him down, and he was first to admit that he wasn't playing at 100%. So big game by DK. And then on the other side of the ball, welcome to the party, Keithon Womack, the 2026 wide receiver, gets by Aiden Anding on the game's first drive for Central. He came through with several really impressive catches. I thought he was able to separate not only outside, but in the middle of the field, make some contested catches at times, and has some outstanding body control and hands to contort his body and keep his composure. I mean, he's a 2026 receiver that, is catching passes from a nickel signed quarterback. We'll see what the quarterback position is like next year, but as someone that can maybe take advantage of the camp or 7-on-7 circuit, kind of show this is a receiver that I think is really capable of playing at the next level. I'm not sure if he's going to be like Tulane, La Tech good, or maybe beyond to Power 4, but 6 foot, 180 pounds, and hell of a ball game for the junior wide receiver.
He started him off with a bang right up the right sideline over the top. Jackson Furman able to hit him in stride for the big strike to start the game, had a great back shoulder catch, and then broke a tackle to make sure he got back to the pylon again late to help, continue to push that game further and further out of reach. You talk about DK Mays, and you mentioned, the tackle here, tackle for loss, not a big number, but part of that is no one on that team had big numbers because there were only 33 offensive plays by Rustin. There were only 24 tackles to be had in this game for the Central defense because they made such big plays when given the opportunity, like the DK scoop and score, Mason Moore with an interception and a fumble recovery, Marvin Joseph with an interception. And so a couple of sophomores there for folks to watch in that 2027 class as well. And you talk about Keithan Womack, Kylan Thomas had a touchdown catch, a senior who was involved in that early season car accident with Jackson Furman and Manny Williams. So great to see all of those guys able to be out there and making plays for that team. Stephen Raynell, I thought a great addition to the Cajuns class late, made plays on both sides of the ball, including the 40-yard reception for a touchdown. He's eager to continue showing more and more folks that he's been overlooked a little bit. But Jackson Furman, I mentioned the straw that stirs the drink when we were talking about Diesel Solari. Jackson and his swagger for that offense and his poise and his development over the last few years from the skinny kid thrown in there a couple years back to now looking more the part of that future Nicholls State quarterback, both physically and with his poise, and delivering 17 for 28 for 233 yards and 5 touchdowns and some really nicely placed balls, both on that back shoulder throw I mentioned, as well as one deep ball after another that he connected with those weapons.
Absolutely, two different teams, from the team that we saw week 1 in New Orleans to the team we saw week 15 in New Orleans, and probably the biggest catalyst there would be Jackson.
There you go. I didn't know if you were about to bounce into some more stuff, but let's jump into D1 Select and wrap this thing up. Another game that was extremely lopsided, and so we're going to focus an awful lot of time talking about Edna Carr, but did want to say JT Lindsay did what he could with what he had in that game, because he finished with 115 yards on 22 carries, still averaging over 5 yards a carry, despite the fact that the vast majority of that contest, he was being met by 2 and 3 Edna Carr defenders 2 yards behind the line of scrimmage, because that was the way that Edna Carr was playing. And so let's get right into that. The defensive front, and a guy that I think you and I are on the same page of saying he was the MVP of this weekend, Richard Anderson, the 2026 defensive tackle, was an absolute monster, as he has been all season long. Watching him go from that big baby at the LSU camp to talking to Bryce Brown every year and seeing the continued work of Richard Anderson, they call him Big Rich down there in Algiers, his continued development year in and year out to be absolutely dominant. Finished with 7 tackles, 6 of them were behind the line of scrimmage, had 1 in the end zone for a safety, had a sack. I mean, start writing, or I guess, continue writing the Big Rich love letter here for his performance to cap this season.
I think the biggest mismatch of the entire weekend, Jared, was the Carr defensive line against the Alexandria offensive line. And again, this is an offensive line that has dominated for 14 of 15 weeks throughout the season. And I think JT finishes his spectacular senior season with still more than 2,800 yards from scrimmage and something like that. And Big Rich was the huge reason why Edna Carr ate Alexandria's lunch. I've never seen as dominant a performance by an interior defensive lineman inside the Superdome in my time doing this. In filming this, saw Big Rich breaking through double teams over and over, making them look silly. He put on an absolutely dominating performance. It's frustrating for me that a defensive player can't come home with honors and recognize that 6 tackles for, I think it's 7 splash plays behind the line of scrimmage in total, can't do it for a defensive lineman, because I think if they played another quarter, he might have had a pick 6 or another safety. He was absolutely incredible. I think, when he worked out at LSU, some of the coaches said that, with Jakeem probably likely to reclassify, we think this is like maybe the best guy in the state, if not, one of the best defensive linemen in the country. And I don't think that they were wrong in that regard. This was a statement for him. And just, people at Carr are talking about him being the best defensive lineman that's ever come through that program. And that's a program that's produced quite a bit of really great defensive linemen over the years. And he still has another year to continue to sharpen up, to frame his body, continue to get stronger. But from an interior tackle, he's bouncy, he's strong, he's quick, and he's got fantastic closing speed. I don't know what else he can do to up his stock. He's the number 25 player in the country on Rivals, and I feel really good going out on a limb for someone with Big Rich's resume so far.
He is a big, strong athlete in the middle of that defensive front for the Cougars, who repeatedly, as you mentioned, overpowers double teams. But the way he moves at his size, from the explosive first step to the quickness of his pass rush and then that closing speed, is incredible. Just, I mean, a big cat attacking opposing backfields every single play. And we're going to talk about some of the offensive playmakers here in a second, including the guy that was named outstanding player for the Cougars. And it's important to recognize, no knock on anything they did on that side of the ball. It was just a performance that stood out so much by Big Rich that it really underscored some of the issues with the voting process, not being able to notice things like that from defensive performers or guys in the trenches in particular. But other standouts on defense: Kevin Martin led the team with 8 tackles, including 1.5 for loss. Tyreek Bragalia, 6 tackles, including 1.5 for loss. A guy that gets overshadowed by a lot of his teammates, but every single time I've seen the Cougars the last 2 years, Tyreek makes several big plays. Arsenio Bolds in the middle of that defense with six tackles. Avant Lewis with a tackle and a half for loss. Cody Morris had a tackle for loss, a breakup that he nearly intercepted deep. Lyric Hawkins with a big play behind the line. List continuing to go on, and getting back to the very beginning of it all, Aiden Hall with a pick 6 that helped kind of kick off that purple and gold powder keg that was waiting for Edna Carr's first state championship since 2019. And they get on the board on defense right off the jump and just continue to snowball that energy from there. But on offense, John Johnson, the quarterback, with all those weapons around him. John, up and down, particularly in the first half, had the 4 interceptions, but finishes 10 for 17 nonetheless, with nearly 200 yards, 2 touchdowns, had 161 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns. And watching his development from last year as a sophomore that was just trying to get out there, figure things out, kind of manage things, to now being that much of a playmaker at the helm of that offense and making things go for them more often than not. I thought a really nice sophomore to junior step for him. And we saw pieces of that in the Superdome on the big stage to shake off some of those bad moments and continue to make positive plays.
Yeah, I think the best thing about John's leap as a junior this year is that, unlike some of the quarterbacks that Carr has had over the past couple of years, John has the bravado, the confidence to continue to dish it out to his weapons, and attempt to make that big throw. If it gets intercepted, it gets intercepted. But he has the confidence in himself, and he's done it quite a few times, so I understand why, to at least attempt that big throw. And I think that's something that Bryce Brown and that offense really gets behind, because they've had some quarterbacks that have been a little bit trigger shy over the years. And we started at the top of the show. This is a receiving core that had Destyn Hill and Aaron Anderson a couple of years ago. And now, this past year had Teron Francis, who had a big game. Dejon Smith, we talked about, the running back turned receiver, turned La Tech superstar, turned future Ole Miss signee.
Man, let
Oliver
those
Mitchell,
Bulldogs up north live, man. Let them enjoy the fact that they stole Dejon from the rest of the recruiting world.
Oliver Mitchell, talented future weapon Uptown, who had a really big catch in this game. But John has that bravado. I love that from him. At this Carr team, you need to be the point guard, because they're going to surround you with speed and talent. And I thought, even though he took his lumps in this game, you would never have known with the way that this offense was humming.
Let's talk some about those receivers, too, as we close it out. Dejon ends up leading the way in terms of yardage and receptions, as he has a lot of this year. 5 catches for 81 yards. Manchild has the 2 touchdowns, the big one down the right sideline off the bat, and then later on in the game goes over a defender and pulls one down. I know LSU fans were really excited from what they saw of those 3 catches for 66 yards and 2 trips to the end zone for Manchild. And then Oliver heading to Tulane, 2 catches for 50 yards. And look, I don't think we ever curse on the Recruit That Boot show, but he shook the heck out of a defender in space, put a guy on his butt to go bring that thing down to the goal line and set up one of those John Johnson touchdown runs. Awesome receiver play, and a lot to be excited about for fans all over the state of Louisiana who are going to be getting those guys to the next level, even if you're already trying to push Dejan on to whatever might be next beyond that.
Just speaking truths, my friend. Shout out to Coach Amari, Carr's wide receiver coach, who has just been absolutely brilliant at not only getting these guys in shape to play early, but play emphatically on these big stages and throughout this entire year. This Carr offense has been down in games and been able to have second half triumphs. And I think in week 15 we saw them humming at their highest clip. And if not for a few turnovers, might have had a running clock in the third quarter. Who even knows? But Dejan, just obviously the speed to be used on gag plays and reverses and screens. He's very versatile, and because of that background as a running back, he's just so dangerous in space. He has just great immediacy and acceleration to his running. And Tehran, I think I've talked about it at times, but the biggest thing, at least from my angle of watching him over the last 4 years, is no one has the amount of upside that he has at that position at 6'2", 200 pounds and measurables through the roof. And I think as a senior, he really did put this together in the most consistent fashion. You can see that a big part of Carr's offense is the receiver's ability to be effective blockers on the perimeter. And Tehran is a devastating blocker on the perimeter. Additionally, he is a freak pass catcher that has a vertical that he can over jump you. He has turned into a contested catch aficionado, which was not always the case. And he also has enough juice in him to get by you working on the perimeter. But he has made plays at all different levels of the field, really come together nicely in his first ever state championship. But he's been a starter for 4 years, which is not usually the case at Carr because they always have talent than juniors in their senior classes. So super happy for Manchild and Dejan and Oliver to go out with a bang. And shout out to Coach O and Coach Bryce.
Yeah, when you put all those ingredients into play and the offensive line play, they've got some talented guys of all ages on that offensive line for the Carr Cougars. And the coaching, you talk about Bryce Brown, Taurus Howard, Norm Randall, and that list going on. Shout out Norm, who is probably watching this right now at some point.
Shout out to he's one of our 3 listeners.
And the energy of that community, both within the school and within Algiers and on the West Bank, and support that all cycled in there to give a 53-8 win, the largest margin of victory ever in a Class 5A or Division I championship game. And so a really special season for the Cougars, a really special performance to cap it all off, and a heck of a way with those 2 Division I games there on Saturday to close out high school football season. The games weren't close, but the performances by those 2 champions were absolutely incredible.
A bunch of really close competitive games that were really fun to watch. And honestly, even though we were surprised by the outcomes on Saturday, to be surprised sometimes involves some highlights and some interesting high school stuff. And we saw some big players either step up or put themselves on the map, which is always fun to do.
And so that's the 2024 high school football season in Louisiana. From our perspective on Recruit That Boot of Louisiana versus all y'all, this will probably be our longest episode until next fall when we get back into actual season. I'm not sure if we will have a chance to connect again before these Christmas holidays. So if we don't, happy holidays, obviously. Merry Christmas to all the folks out there like Norm Randall who check us out and support what we're doing here, talking about some of these fantastic student athletes around the state. Definitely appreciate y'all's time listening. And as always, appreciate Sam for the time chatting and chopping up some of these things that we're watching at the high school level and beyond.
Appreciate you, Jarrett. Appreciate you, Norm. Appreciate all of our listeners, whether they have or haven't listened to us throughout the year. It really is just to quote Archie Manning one more time, high school football is so great. High school football is great, and getting to see a lot of those faces in the dome. Even this Grinch's heart can turn warm every now and then, I like to say.
He's Sam Spiegelman, obviously in the holiday mood already, coming off of these state championships. I'm Jet Rosa for Louisiana versus all y'all's Recruit That Boot. Thanks again, everyone, for tuning in. And again, if we don't see y'all next week, then Merry Christmas to y'all.